there, I am Mr. Brass. David Woods is a Christian apologist who has debated Muslims and atheists in an effort to spread Christianity. Now, this video might shock some of my Christian fans and friends, as many of them like David Woods, and truth be told, so do I. Now, while I defend the Christian faith along with others, I am also a deist, and more importantly, a man that takes on all comers. Now, in this video, I will be examining David's Why I Am a Christian video, and making, in my opinion, fair criticisms of it.
Imagine an underground world made of concrete and steel, stairways and tunnels, just enough light to see the signs on the walls. Suppose there were people who lived down here all their lives and were never allowed to visit the surface, and that these people were told from the time they were born that this world is all that exists. Wouldn't they believe what they're told to believe? Wouldn't they try to live like it's true? Suddenly a madman stumbles down the stairs and says to the people living here, "Don't you realize that you're underground? Don't you know that there's an amazing world right up those stairs, and that a tomb, no matter how spacious, is still a tomb?" But the people laugh at the man. They say, "We understand our world just fine without all your rambling about another. Go back to your flying spaghetti world, fool."
If this madman of yours was able to bring up a good argument for why there was actually a world above, then the people underground would have justification for believing in the man. Since you've described this man as a madman, why should they believe him when what he's describing contradicts what they know? If an obviously crazy person came up to you and started discussing far-out topics, wouldn't you think it is fair to doubt his claims?
I also noticed that people didn't share my amazing insights into the nature of reality. I remember sitting beside a lake when I was 8 years old, watching ants march in perfect formation. And it suddenly became entirely clear to me that ants ruled the world and had only tricked us human beings into thinking that we were in charge. By the time I was in 10th grade, I was convinced that I controlled the weather. I didn't know how I controlled the weather, I just knew that I did. It would start raining and I would think, okay, how did I do that? I also had the ability to control time, but I didn't know how to use this ability yet.
So, you were a bit of a narcissist in your early years, and you ascribed to yourself many powers and believed that you were smarter than everyone else. You apparently weren't self-conscious enough to think that perhaps there was a problem with yourself and that you needed help.
The world has all of us on a leash made of rules. Do this, don't do that. But it's a leash that slips right off as soon as we recognize that we don't have to do anything anyone tells us to do.
Even some psychopaths know the value of playing pretend and following the rules, as doing so can allow them to possibly get away with bad things. Think Dexter, or a real-world example, Ted Bundy. Also, things like the social contract and consequentialism are worth looking into, even if I don't fully agree with them.
After a while, my senses returned to me, and I walked into my dad's bedroom at about 2 o'clock in the morning, Thanksgiving Day. I stood over him with the hammer, and I tried to think of one wrong thing he'd ever done to me. Nothing came to mind.
Why were you trying to think of one thing? Why did you care? Now, I'm not saying you should have done it, but I'm saying that given that moment, why did you need a reason to do it? Shouldn't you have, like you stated before, realized that you were just being manipulated by society into thinking that you needed one?
Did I mention that I was an atheist? I understand that most of you atheists out there live perfectly normal lives, but I can never understand why you would want to. Think about it. We've got this massive universe, and over here is a tiny little crumb of a galaxy. Out of one of the spiral arms of this galaxy is a thoroughly unremarkable ball of hot gas. Circling this ball of hot gas is a pathetic speck of cosmic dust we call Earth, and crawling all over the Earth are these feeble, selfish, self-destructive lumps of cells constantly deluding themselves into thinking that what they do is so important. But the universe couldn't conceivably care less, whether you love your neighbor as yourself or torture him to death for fun.
Yep, I agree that life is objectively meaningless, but I think your assessment fails to take into account that really meaning of life is just a description of how we inspect current events, our emotional relation to them, and how to survive as a group with one another in that scope of reasoning. Now, I'll remind you that there are a lot of atheist philosophers who hold to objective morality, Sam Harris as the most obvious, and if you loosen the definition of philosopher.
I would ask myself, is there a point to any of this? Nothing really matters, so what difference does it make whether I do everything I've been planning or I do nothing at all? There's no blue ribbon for making the right decision here because there is no right.
It seems your nihilism and your mental illness were in conflict with one another. A lot of serial killers never end up caring whether things ultimately have no meaning, and for a lot of them that is all the motivation they need, aka that there is no meaning and nothing matters. I do find it funny that you came to being a Christian after being in prison. Being in a stressful environment will lead you to look for comfort, and revealed religion is all about that comfort. I do find it fitting, though, that one convicted criminal would find comfort in another, more divine convicted criminal.
Randy was lying on his bunk reading his Bible one night, and I walked up to him and said, "Do you know why you're reading the Bible? You're reading the Bible because you were born in the United States. If you've been born anywhere else, you believe in something else. If you've been born in China, you'd be a Buddhist. If you've been born in India, you'd be a Hindu. If you've been born in Saudi Arabia, you'd be a Muslim, because people like you believe whatever you're told to believe." I've since heard other atheists say the same thing in almost exactly the same words, so I take it that this is a common atheist view of Christians, which is hilarious in its level of hypocrisy. I believe that the universe exploded out of nowhere for no reason, and that life formed on its own, and that consciousness was a natural product of particle interactions in our brains, and that moral values were nothing but societal indoctrination, and that Jesus' followers made up a story about him rising from the dead because they wanted his message to spread. I believed all of this without anything remotely resembling a careful investigation of the evidence, which means I believed a lot of what I'd been told.
This is the genetic fallacy, and atheists do say this a lot, although guys like Massimo Paolucci have found a work around this, which I go to in my other video.
So we got into the world's first ever fasting battle. It wasn't a battle for him, he wasn't trying to outdo me at anything, but I was certainly trying to outdo him. Randy would fast for long periods of time, nothing but water. After a while, I joined in. And whenever he would complete a fast, I'd start my own fast and then go a few days longer than he did.
To cut it short, David as a result of this would engage in long periods of not eating. Someone who is just jumping into fasting can experience hardships. Malnutrition can cause psychiatric disorders to pop up, which with David's already pre-existing mental health issues, it doesn't lead to a rational state of mind. The lack of a rational mind is shown in David's later statements when he said he would experience blackouts. Overall, not good.
With graded assignments. So here I am, a rapidly deteriorating atheist, sitting in a poorly lit cell, doing my Bible homework, getting straight A's. I haven't eaten in days, and I read about Jesus saying, "I'm the bread of life. He who comes to me will never go hungry."
This is what I was talking about beforehand. You're mentally beaten, malnourished, and I would assume depressed to an extent. During this time period, you're reading the Gospel of John, aka the latest of the Gospels, and the more mythical one where Jesus' divinity is reinforced. You also were focusing on the happy verses. This can lead to having selection bias and not really investigating the matter rationally.
First, what's called the design argument finally hit me. I was looking at a wall and how the bricks were arranged, and I thought to myself, you know, if someone told me that these bricks went into this order by some process that didn't involve intelligence, I'd smack them in the mouth. And yet I believe that life formed without intelligence, when the most basic living cell is unimaginably more complicated than some bricks stacked on a wall.
The reason why atheists say a brick wall is designed and not life isn't because of its complexity, but of the fact that we have prior knowledge. The reason why we say a watch is designed is due to the fact that we know people build watches and we know people go into the making of these things. We don't have similar prior knowledge with things like life.
Second, I found out how Jesus' apostles died. Most of them went to their bloody deaths claiming that they had seen him risen from the dead. My explanation for the origin of Christianity had always been that the apostles made up a story so that they could spread his message, but now my explanation wasn't making sense. If you're willing to die for something, you have to believe it. When a terrorist blows himself up, he's obviously sincere.
Yes, they believed it, but people believing in something and that something being true is two different things. Also, as I've pointed out in my video with S.J. Thomason, we don't know exactly how many died, and a couple that we can say died believing Jesus rose from the dead, whether that was spiritually or not, did not know Jesus. They never met him and weren't there at the time of the event. So as far as we know, they died thinking that Jesus died because that was a popular legend going on at the time, which stemmed from the circumstances of Jesus' death and his apocalyptic teachings.
Third, I started worrying that Jesus might actually be better than me. Now, if you're not a complete moral relativist or maybe one of the new atheists, it's probably obvious to you that Jesus is better than me. But I wasn't the clearest thinker on moral issues back then, so getting my mind around this was very difficult.
I'm not a relativist or a new atheist. I'm a nihilist, so my stance on whether or not you're morally better than Jesus is obvious. Now, you are better than Jesus in many ways. You're better educated, you didn't betray your family's religion by being a part of a heretical cult that allowed yourself to be worshipped, and you haven't, for as far as I know, bought into the idea that the world is going to end in your follower's lifetime. Take that as you will.
I had two beliefs that just didn't go together. On the one hand, I believe that human beings are lumps of cells, meaningless lumps of cells, and that everything we did was pointless. At the same time, I believe that I was the best, most important person in the entire world. How is it possible to be the best, most important, worthless lump of cells?
Rather easy, actually. How we perceive ourselves is a value judgment, which is just a description we assign ourselves based on environmental circumstances and perceived gains and losses of ourselves, which ultimately boils down to just chemical reactions in the brain. I have a rather low value judgment of myself as I assess the information that I am overweight, single, and demonstrably lazy, and it gets processed into this feeling of sorrow. Now, this value judgment is just how I perceive myself due to the cultural situation I am in and how my brain is. There are a number of situations where being fat, single, and lazy could be considered a good thing. Same thing applies to you, as all of this ultimately is just how your brain perceives things in order to make improvements so you can better propagate your DNA.
So how was I going to do anything right? And then it hit me that there are two possibilities. Either I'm violent and selfish and uncaring, and that's just the way things are, or there's someone who can help people like me. Either I'm all messed up and that I just had to live with that, or there was someone who could deal with this sort of thing. And when you start thinking like that, I'd say you're about 2 inches away from becoming a Christian, because when we ask ourselves, who out of anyone ever, who had the ability to take psychologically, spiritually, and morally shattered people and give them new life, we get a list of one.
You don't include the Buddha on that list? He was known for what he did to the poor and for helping people. Hell, even Muhammad did that to an extent. Also, what you presented was an either-or fallacy. The third option is that you are messed up, but you need to work towards a task that makes you forget that and truly believe in help so that you can come out stronger knowing you're the one who did it and not your belief in God.
One person on the list. He's the one who said, I am the door. If anyone enters through me, he will be saved and will go in and out and find pasture. The thief comes only to steal and kill and destroy. I came that they may have life and have it abundantly. I didn't know if Jesus was who he claimed to be, but I knew that it was Jesus or nothing. It was Jesus or nothing. If anyone has God's stamp of approval, it's the guy who rose from the dead.
So you discounted all the other religions out there? Also, if that is the only two choices out there, then I think I prefer nothing. I take more of a position that people initially believed Jesus spiritually rose from the dead, but due to the apocalyptic culture of the time mixed in with Jesus' unorthodox teachings and perception, him rising from the dead was changed to be physical rather than spiritual. It was really a legend that changed over time, just like that of Paul Bunyan and Robin Hood.
God created the universe, but we're something special. We're created in God's image. But we reject God, and in rejecting God, we strive to twist and warp His image, which we bear. For years, I was willing to sacrifice everything for a kind of freedom, just a freedom from external control. It's a false freedom, because we just end up using it to degrade and destroy ourselves.
I agree that God created the universe, although the whole He made us in His image thing I'm less willing to accept. We don't choose what to believe, but we get choices of environments and situations to an extent which influences how we believe. That is really all the points I wanted to get across. He did go into Paul, but that really more appeals to his narrative of being a sinner before being saved, which he already made clear in the video. Overall, I think David's story does show logical problems on how he came to believe in Jesus, and shows that David, while being a good apologist, is still susceptible to erroneous thinking. I want to make clear that I'm not knocking on David for being a Christian, and if Christianity has gave him a renewed sense of meaning, then I think that is fine. I just think his coming to Christianity is riddled with holes. That is all for today, and this is Mr. Brass saying goodbye and get wise.